All right, and now we have the opportunity to hear from Sheri Spaine Long, who is the current Executive Director of the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. She is the former editor-in-chief of Hispania and Foreign Language Annals, both flagship journals of AATSP and the American Council of Teaching of Foreign Languages, respectively. Sheri also has 10 years of lead editorial experience. She is a career academic with over 100 publications, including books, articles, chapters, and reviews. Sheri also served as full professor at University of Alabama at Birmingham, the United States Air Force Academy, and UNC Charlotte. And Sheri is faculty board member for Spanish and Portuguese Review. And so we are seeking her insight for all of these reasons and more, and expertise in regards to peer review. So we have the questions categorized into 3 categories so we can understand from experts' opinions about various perspectives. So the first perspective that we'll ask Sheri about on peer review is about your own process. So questions about your own process when you are reviewing a paper. The first question is, what is your process for reviewing a scholarly paper or manuscript?
Sure. No. Well, first, once it's sent to me, what I do first is I do a quick read for logic and just try to work my way through, get the most sort of general sense of what kind of shape the submission is in. I need to really make sure I understand what the main points are. So that's a read where I try not to get distracted by anything on the surface. And just understand what the author is trying to communicate. So I do a quick read through like that. And once I feel like I've got that piece figured out, then I also ask myself a quick question, how original is this? How unique is it? Because obviously the point of publishing is to push back the borders of knowledge and to try and expand the knowledge base, right? And so keeping that piece in mind, is it obvious? Did the author state directly how this contributes to scholarship and how it pushes back the borders of the existing body of knowledge? So I try to do that first because that's going to help me understand in some ways where this paper is going to fit into the greater universe of publications. And then my next, once I've got that kind of figured out, because those are big picture issues, then I go back and I do another read that's more line by line, kind of commenting where something might be off, where they could add a little more, what parts are really clear, that kind of a thing. And so I do that. And it just depends on what shape the manuscript is in, how many times I end up passing back through. But that's my general process. Yeah. I go for big picture, and then I go for a more detailed read through the manuscript.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So is it safe to understand it's initially a two read process, one for kind of larger overall goals. What are you trying to demonstrate and write about and your contributions to the field? And then your second read through is a little bit more detailed where you leave comments.
Yeah, and I really think it would be silly to think that it's just 2 reads. It's
okay.
I mean, not to steal the thunder of one of the later questions, but how long does it take? Well, it does depend upon the shape the manuscript's in, right? Okay. And so there's a gamut. There are things that come in really good shape because the writer may be more experienced or they happen to be a person who organizes their thoughts exceptionally well. I can say when I was in graduate school, but even still, that is not me, okay? I mean, my writing process is not very linear. And so, why would anybody be different than that in my head, right? So I think in terms of just trying to really do right by reviewing, it really is multiple passes, trying to break down. I don't know. I think there's also just things we don't think about that I've been doing more when I've been reviewing over the last few years. And that is simply thinking about the reader. Who's going to read this?
Yeah.
How readers have changed so much that really, if you don't signpost your article, even if it's in literature, which we didn't used to do, the attention span of readers obviously is diminished with the internet. So this idea of trying to help organize by signposting, for example, an article may be something that, like in grad school, because you take a lot of papers and you turn them into articles, that may not be something that one has thought of. So I tend, if I'm reviewing for like, a journal that I know, like I'm a reviewer for Dimension, Scholt's Southern Conference on Language Teaching. And I know that a lot of those authors, it will be their first publication. And I find I spend a lot of time on those because you know that you're in the mentoring mode as a reviewer. If I will say, when I was vetting articles for Hispania, because I wasn't the peer reviewer, rather the editor, but I would still go through a similar process. But I would probably spend less time simply because I had more manuscripts, and there are many more. If you're submitting to a flagship, you probably have more publication experience. So the mentoring piece was probably not in the forethought that I was putting in the process. So it really kind of depends on who I'm reviewing for.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I kind of just wanted to call attention to the highlighting the mentorship mode when you're reviewing papers, especially at Spanish and Portuguese review. Our papers, our manuscripts are reviewed by grad student colleagues, but also by faculty. And I think that's a really important and valuable aspect about submitting to graduate student journals, to get sort of that mentorship from your feedback. I think that's really helpful. And we, being a published SPR author myself, really value the time that faculty take to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty stunning. If you really think about how many hours you put into a review, like a minimum number of hours would be something 4 or 5, but I've put multiple sessions into an article that I would like to see get into print, where I've done very detailed work. And it's been on, more like a 12-hour, a few different sessions, if you will, putting everything together and really thinking about it. And why would I do that? Well, because I see there's really something good there. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so my hope is by putting in a lot of hours that I would help get that person up over the hump, and they have enough feedback to be able to work with comments and so forth, to be able to polish it up and get it ready for publication. So yeah, I mean, every article you review is so unique. It's actually kind of hard to generalize.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing your experience. The third question for this particular category is about do's and don'ts. If you can categorize those, I know kind of based on what you've been saying, it might be difficult too, because the diversity makes it hard to generalize in this aspect, but still, what is one do or one don't piece of advice you would give to graduate students submitting an article for potential publication?
Probably the first do would be to really familiarize yourself with the venue you want to publish in. That doesn't mean you have to read, the last 5 issues from cover to cover, but it does mean that you need to kind of figure out what the culture and climate of the journal that you're targeting, and is this an appropriate place to publish it? One of the things I've seen in my experience has been that people haven't really thought that through. They just sort of have an idea of what the journal's like in their head or something, or they just read something online very quickly. But you really have to look at the kinds of articles that are being because if it just says, well, we publish culture on, well, that can mean about anything. And then if you waste time submitting something for peer review, and it just is a really bad match for the journal, then it's probably going to sit for a few weeks at least somewhere with an editor that's basically going to turn around and tell you this would be, I don't know, better placed in the Graduate Student Journal of History equivalent or something like that, as opposed to our journal. So I think there's something to be said for really familiarizing yourself with your targeted place you want to publish, because that was always very heartbreaking to me as an editor to see things get uploaded that just like, why did they submit it here? Like they just weren't thinking, or they never cracked open. It sort of told me that they never had clicked open an Hispania and kind of click through what kinds of articles are they interested, or what have they been interested in the last 5 years. And another sort of way to game that, another do or a don't, it depends how you think of it. Let's say you're a specialist in X, okay? Or you're doing your dissertation on X. Well, if journal Y has just done a special issue on that particular topic, in some ways, it's going to be unlikely that they want to just keep publishing. I mean, there's this idea of balance, right? And so, so I think in terms of like, if there have been 10 articles on that author or something of the sort within the last 2 or 3 years, it may actually diminish your chances of getting your piece in print, even though they're interested in the topic. You have to kind of think that through. And I think one thing you can do, and this is a do that you can do, but you have to be careful to be differential and not pest-like, and that would be to write to the editor and say, hey, I just saw that you did a special issue on X, Y, or Z, and I have an article on this, but is it too soon? Would you be interested, or should I submit it elsewhere? What's the worst thing that can happen? I know a lot of people really don't want to write editors because it's scary, right?
Yeah.
Like weird answers, right? I'm just saying, because I've been on this podcast, you get very strange answers. But the worst thing that can happen is they pretty much just don't answer your email, right?
Yeah.
So it's because it will save you time. I mean, if you're feeling the pressure of like, I really need to get published before I finish grad school because it'll enhance my opportunities for employment, you just don't have time to waste. So I think those kinds of external things you can do to try and expedite your publication agenda really can help. And those are things I would recommend doing that I think are good do's. Those are what come to mind right now, but I may think of some more.
Okay, awesome. No, these are all super helpful. And without spreading too much time into the next, taking up too much time, I just really want to highlight, I've heard the theme emerge about saving time and being really strategic about your use of time. I just wanted to highlight, because I felt like that was a theme coming out of a lot of what you just said. And I think graduate students will really latch on to that and appreciate that you've been reminding them of that. Just because something I was thinking about when you were talking was, it might feel like a lot of time to do this initial research, emailing the editor, checking out previous publications, being strategic, like you said, about a special issue. That might think, oh, this is a lot of time, I just want to work on my paper. Whereas that will actually perhaps save you time in the long run. So I think that's a really helpful piece of it.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, I'm old, and I remember when we did everything by mail for publication, and it took so long. And the best advice I remember somebody ever told me, and I thought it was kind of a joke when I first heard it, but it was like, so just have a little stack of your articles all printed out and your envelopes ready, because you'll get like a reject notice and you have to get ready to resubmit somewhere else. Oh. This is, now at least it's a relatively speedy process. Always, but generally speaking, compared to the bad old days. And like, if you kind of really wrap your head around whatever I can do on the front end to front load and save time, that's going to help you. And then also you have to just kind of get over, and this is easier said than done, taking feedback and understanding that in most of the time, I mean, I've seen a lot of peer reviews. Most of the time, the comments are constructive and they really are meant to benefit you. It's very rare that you get somebody just being difficult. But it does happen. It can happen. And so that is something that you learn to deal with as well. But the take-home message there is you really just have to kind of get over, like, I sort of made a little pact with myself because I tend to react to things. That's just my nature, to just like, okay, so when you open up the email or whatever to read the feedback, to just please don't do it right before you go in to teach. Really bad idea, right? Because you get failed. And also do it sometime when you can just sit down and read it. Don't let anything set you off or have a reaction. Just close the email or download the attachment, and then just give yourself 24 hours and come back to it later with a really clear head, because you're going to have to decide to what it is your article. And it's very fair to say a lot of times that, look, graduate students spend way more time working on their dissertation than Joe Blow professor out there who's just done one publication on this and look like they would be a good match for this review, but in fact doesn't have the depth of knowledge. I mean, that's a fair statement, right? That happens. What they are good at pointing out is when it's hard to read your article, like when there's something not clear in language, things like that. And so reviewers have all different strengths and weaknesses, and you don't actually know who they are usually. So it would be very hard to figure that out. However, you just got to have kind of a little strategy. If you react to things, you got to get used to getting and receiving back more than just the kind of, I'm too far away from grad school now to really know how you get feedback in grad school. But when I was in grad school, it tended just to be in the form of grades and not very much else. And that was really problematic, to kind of go from just getting dumb old grades to like having these big, long, feedbacks written by people in the field. And it, at that point, really did occur to me that it would have been nice to have gotten more feedback in graduate school that was constructive. I think that's probably changed, but I can't speak to that because I really don't know.
Yeah, no, well, gosh, thank you for sharing the insight on that. That is a good segue into the next question. And the positionality has to do with being faculty on an editorial board, and these ideas that you kind of just mentioned of getting a grade, so to speak, kind of relates to when you submit a paper and your grade is accept as is, accept with revisions, or do not accept. So in your positionality on an editorial board, what do you look for or prioritize when you are reviewing a paper to decide which direction or how you will respond, whether it's accept with revisions, or do not accept? You did talk about some things which may come up again at the beginning of our conversation, but is there anything else that you would add about what you're prioritizing or looking for in your read through of the papers?
Yeah, there would be, okay, so probably the easiest thing is to talk quickly about do not accept. And I personally don't tend to give out a lot of those because I'm a born nurturer. However, there are some things that are absolutely like can't go there. For example, if you notice that you are looking at something that's plagiarized and you know it, and that does happen, and it's so easy to sort of check it now online, right? And so that would be an example of something, that would be a do not accept. And I'm going to give you the most banal, awful example, but I remember reviewing one manuscript that had plagiarized word for word from Wikipedia. And somebody do that that's trying to build a scholarly reputation. I have to put background knowledge in articles. I totally get it. But the idea that somebody would do that so sloppily, to me, was just a violation of every sort of scholarly standard, if you will. So something like it would have to be something that would really kind of violate an ethics code that would send me in the direction not accept. The other problem that will come up with do not accept is, and this doesn't happen as frequently with graduate students, but it might happen with somebody who's been out of grad school for 5 years, and it would kind of go like this, that if you look at an article and then you're looking at the references, and the references are all very old, and they haven't really consulted more recent literature on the topic, and you happen to know because you move around a lot and you read a lot that there's been a lot of work done on whatever it is, languages for specific purposes or whatever it is, and they just haven't, like that, it comes across as kind of lazy not to, and actually kind of like full of yourself to think, well, my article that I wrote, but I didn't really bother to research well. It is hard in the world that we live in. It's hard and easy in the sense that everything's at our fingertips online in general. So you can look up sources easily and read them, but on the other hand, there's this anxiousness of getting published that sometimes works against people being fairly thorough in their literature review. And it's not that you have to write a really long literature review because you have to compress it. So that's another one of those acceptable revision cases. So a very typical thing that younger scholars will do who are less experienced, I shouldn't say younger, but those that have less experience publishing, that are newer to the field, and they may be of any age, they tend to get all carried away with their literature review because in a dissertation, it's super long. I'm showing everybody in the world that I've read everything about this topic. And in an article, typically it would never take up any more than really 15% of the real estate in your article. So what that means is you have to really summarize your and show that you really put in the time and the body of literature, but not go bananas trying to explain every little thing about every little article that you read. So those are kind of things that occur to me that Except As is great, Lillian. Those are my favorite articles because it just it was a quick review for me because this thing is in really good shape. But to be honest, that's not the majority of articles. The majority of articles are more in the middle. They still need work. And that's just the reality because we tend not to share prior to uploading an article or sending it in. And the thing that you have happen along the way, and if you're lucky, it happens to you in grad school, but you find somebody that can be like your writing buddy that you don't have to apologize to 15 times for like, would you please read my article because I'd like to send it in somewhere, but I need to get feedback prior to doing so. That's probably the best possible thing you can do, but you have to find somebody that will do that for you. Although I know on college campuses, there are writing programs, labs sometimes where you can get people to read where you don't even feel like you're putting them out. But, in the world that we live in, people just feel like, oh my God, I can't ask. I know they're so busy. I'm never going to be able to do that. And like, you have to. And if you're really I didn't come across that little cadre of people I could ask until pretty late in the game. And it is like the best thing ever because they really help you get it in shape for publication. And then you turn around and you help them. And even when it's not good timing, you still help them. So those are things from my perspective and those come in, the ones that come in kind of ready to go. I have no empirical data to prove this, but my guess is they probably worked with other people prior to submitting it so that it's in really, really good shape.
Well, I love the idea of kind of checking in with your community. And just really quickly before we get to our last question, I think that is really something that in my experience, fortunately, the graduate student community, my experience anyways, is that there is a lot of camaraderie in helping students work with their papers, especially since at the early years in grad school, we're in classes together working on papers for the project, which are often turned into publishable manuscripts. So I think thinking from a graduate student perspective and based on what you've said about like getting peer support and support on your paper before you submit it can be something that you develop organically in your grad classes as you develop these papers and then on campus communities for sure. Switching gears a little bit for our last question, in regards to professional development, thinking about as you go through the experience and process of doing peer review, what are some of the main benefits from the process of reviewing papers? For example, if we're thinking about transferable skills maybe, or how they'll benefit you as a professional?
Well, okay, so I feel like, just from my own experience, that as I review more and more, I'm a stronger writer, because I tend, there's questions you ask yourself, and it's always hard to review your own work. So you become a stronger writer. A stronger writer will help you in about any number of ways, because it helps you think more clearly, and write better pieces if you're going to be an academic or in any other field that you might need to organize your thoughts and present yourself clearly. So I always tell everybody that the issue with being a peer reviewer, and also just being an aspiring person who wants to publish, is that it's never too early to volunteer to be a peer reviewer, even though you think you don't have time because you're in grad school. Get it? If you learn the process from the other side, it is unbelievably helpful, because, and for a couple of reasons, you learn about the journal, the culture, and the climate. You also learn what questions they may be sharing with their authors, or what kind of a worksheet they get, or what kind of do they get a series of questions, or how does that work? So when I was editing foreign language annals, there was a software that was fairly similar to what you see with Hispania and the Scholar one, that will have, like, here are some canned questions, and then there's comments that reviewers can make, and they can upload their comments and things like that. But if you're able to see those before you submit your own work, you can use that worksheet of questions on your own work. Even better, give that worksheet with those questions, which sometimes are just available on their website with a PDF. I mean, it's not like it's so clandestine, but a lot of times you have to become a peer reviewer to really see them. And so if you have those, you've given yourself like a huge leg up in your own publication, because you know exactly what they're going to look for with respect to, these are the questions that guide a peer reviewer through the process from the perspective of Hispania, for example. So I think peer reviewing, in terms of being, because the thing that peer reviewers that are in grad school have that others don't have, and you underestimate this, is that you are a real-time expert, because you're doing all of that reading on the topic.
Yeah.
More so than somebody 10 years out who's trying to hold down a job, who's gotten a gigantic life in the meantime, and the reading becomes really hard to find that time to stay current. So that's like the card. So I actually, when I was editor of Hispania, we have this giant database, and you can go in and just volunteer to peer review. I mean, it's not like it's closed process. And if you volunteer to peer review, I would love it when I had grad students that were reviewing, because they were much more up on sure in the field. And also they tend to be, if they can afford it, they tend to be the ones that are going to conferences and hearing the new ideas. And maybe less so than that mid-career professor out there that has all the demands of committee work and crazy stuff that you have. And so I think that peer reviewing, like at different junctures of one's career, if you are offered the opportunity, it's great. And another kind of little thing that I wanted to sort of throw out there, it's not exactly peer review, but it's to get more editorial experience. Bonita Dumitrescu, who is the book media review editor of Hispania, is always looking for volunteers to write book media reviews. And it's a way to get, you essentially go to the Hispania website, and you can look and see her coordinates are there, and you basically send your CV, such as it is. And then she will make a match as materials come in. And it's not the same as writing an article, but it's a really good warm up for learning the publication process, getting used to all of the bells and whistles of publication that that you need to be able to do
Mhm.
to be able to get that first article in print. And I will say it's very different. Grad students are up against so much now, I think so much pressure to publish. When I was in grad school, I just kind of lucked out. And I mean, honestly, this sounds really awful. I literally just lucked out and landed an article in Foreign Language Annals because somebody came up to me and said, you know, I did a paper and they said, you really need to write that up, dear. That was to say dear. And so I did, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And because grad students didn't have the pressure to publish, they just did not back then. And it is so much harder now. And I, you know, acknowledge that. And I really want to thank you and the SPR staff and Stacy, the editor, because it's like the tools that are provided through SPR with respect to gaining expertise in publication are just, you know, you can't put a value on them. They're so important.
Yeah, I agree. And so also thank you so much. Thank you for all your time and all that you do for AATSP and SPR. You're definitely part of the community to help provide these materials and all of the resources that we have for the graduate student community. So thank you for that and for your time today. I feel like this was a really insightful conversation. I know I learned a lot, and hopefully many other graduate students and scholars in general really had something to think about too.
Well, good. Well, thank you. I just appreciate it so much. And look forward to future encounters talking about publication.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thank you.